I'll ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
Shout out to Randy Moss and all his wonderful glories. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disloyal Idiots podcast here on the Fans First Sports Network. Christian E. Guzman. I'm joined by Andy Pregler, no Steve Howler today, as he is traveling the world in liquor form in Epcot, probably at this point right now. So we congratulate him on that miraculous achievement, and hopefully have him back next week, where we hopefully will talk about a Syracuse win next week, which honestly is looking more and more likely as the weeks go on. I mean, it's not likely, but it's still looking more likely based on team trends. We'll also try and have Andy on for a full 60 minutes of this show, his internet notwithstanding.
Yeah, we're gonna do my best here. This is the stress test. This is the one that needs to actually hold up. So I'm feeling pretty confident, which means that I should not be feeling confident. But I definitely feel as confident as most of the Syracuse players did going up against Colgate this weekend. Which again, this is not basketball. Colgate is not a trick game. This is football, where this is not too difficult here, and it honestly wasn't. I think that there was definitely some things to be slightly concerned about, but the player rotation was, I think, a big part of some of the, basically what I'm trying to say is when Colgate had big plays, we were rotating guys like it was the EFL round 2 of a major soccer tournament in England here. There was just an insane amount of rotation happening, and I am not going to really look too much into that. The only thing that I will take a lot of slight concern with is mostly I would really like our offense to start hot. Like this whole offense needing a couple of drives to let Angeli get hit, see the pressures, do all these different things. Don't love that. It feels like I know this is more of a Steve thing, but when Tony White, he was a very read and react kind of defensive coordinator. I don't like our offense doing that. I think the offense needs to come out on the front foot a little bit more.
And yeah, we can't take too much away from the Colgate game in terms of that, because it is Colgate, and yes, the offense did start hot, but again, it is Colgate. So yes, it was definitely good to see. You wanted to see that last week. You wanted to see Syracuse get out to a hot start, but then UConn was, I think, better than people expected, and then they lost to Delaware. But that's besides the point. I think that's the good way to calm the nerves. Obviously, you want to see that again, like Andy said, the same quick start effect against Clemson next week. Now, how hard will that be against that Death Valley crowd? And maybe a little bit muted based on recent results, but who knows? It's going to be interesting to see. But that's definitely the game you wanted to see from the offense to give you some confidence setting up for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest issues that I look, Angeli's numbers continue to be prolific. Syracuse, under Jeff Nixon, continues to be a prolific passing attack, which I think is really important for future recruiting purposes here. One of the biggest issues that I had was the not lack of commitment to the run game, but man, that run game is just so not a thought right now. It really shows why LeQuint Allen is impressing with the Jaguars behind the scenes. It shows why Fran was so high on LeQuint going into his first season here. It's just really obvious that Allen was a special kind of guy, and I'm not having Yassine Willis kind of exposed a lot of the youth. And in Nixon's case, I was talking to some sources that I have around the program. Apparently, the fumbling thing is known with Nixon. This is not a new discovery, and it's somewhat concerning to know that if Willis goes down, this running game is going to be borderline non-existent. But again, was talking to some different sources. It seems like it's exactly what we expected with Willis and Grant to an extent. If the Clemson game was this week, I think you see them both in uniform, and I think you see both of them getting snaps. Are they 100%? No. But they would play if necessary. And I think getting the week off is a lot better than throwing them out there in a like Christian, like you said, like a game where the outcome was known, it was a good time to rest it. But back to your original point about the offense getting hot, like we need to see Angeli be able to feel confident slinging the ball around at a lot of different launch points. I personally thought that my biggest takeaway from this game in the passing game was the team's ability to stretch the field. We didn't see a lot of that against Tennessee due to just challenges with their pressure and obviously how good they were able to rush 5, drop 6. Not going to be able to do a whole lot in those scenarios. Against UConn, we didn't see a ton of great deep throws. We obviously took a lot more chances, but there was a lot of inaccuracies. There was some miscommunication. Obviously, mossing aside, there was multiple deep throws that were much better timed out, much better on target, and also just called a little bit more consistently. And I think, I know this is a college football podcast, not an NFL podcast, but when you look at where the NFL is going with this like too high safety look and you just going dink and dunk, you still need to take your shots deep in order to keep the defense honest, in order to open up the rest of the offense. And I think that against Clemson coming up this week, they have been very susceptible to overplaying certain scenarios. And so for Syracuse, if I'm, the defensive team over at Clemson, I am saying, like, yeah, let them challenge us deep. Like, we're playing for the middle stuff. We're playing for the screen game. We're playing for the run game. Syracuse is going to need to be able to take the top off if they want to have a chance this weekend against Clemson. And to see that done with much more consistency was reassuring. And even more reassuring to see guys like Daryl Gill go and make the plays instead of it just being like, oh, Colgate's bad. Like, that was a throw that was a little bit underthrown. Gill was covered to a man, and he made a fantastic play. Like, that's the kind of stuff that just needs to happen more if Syracuse is going to hang with this ridiculous road schedule that they have in front of them.
And it was good for Gill to have that game because he really hasn't had that game yet this year where he's been the focal point of the receiving game. The first week it was Jonte Cook with a bit of Tyshawn Russell sprinkled in. Last week it was Dan Villari, and now this week it's Gill. And so, something to add to that as well, to your point, is if Syracuse gets a healthy Jonte Cook on Clemson, the rumors are that he's still a bit banged up and not playing at 100%. But if you have a full go Jonte Cook for Clemson, that gives you 2 downfield threats that can stretch the field. And both of those guys have the ability to play mid to short game as well. Gill has the body for that. Cook has the speed for that. But because they both can stretch the field in that way with their speed, it can play a factor against that Clemson team.
Yeah, and I think one thing that Clemson is doing well right now, there's not a whole lot going on great with the Clemson team at the moment, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But one of the things that they do well is just winning battles in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. They've got a couple of defensive tackles that will be playing in the NFL someday. One of them might be a top 10 pick when he comes out. And it's this scenario to me where we talked about the offensive line every week here because Steve's here. But the real factor here is that Clemson is able to disrupt along the line. Where they're struggling is that they have a similar issue to Syracuse. Like, the linebackers are just remarkably inconsistent and are having problems executing what they're being asked to do, and the secondary is then paying the price for not having linebacker support. But they do have the defensive line trench work. One of the ways that you can work around this is if you have wide receivers that are fast and you have wide receivers that can go up and get balls, you can do a 3-step drop and get the ball out of there, and there's nothing the defensive line can do about it. And so seeing that against Clemson and seeing that in the second half of that game against UConn, really important, because that's going to be the recipe to win this game. You're going to need to kind of do what Georgia Tech did, you're going to need to do what some other teams have done so far in their upsets. Like I was watching the Vanderbilt game against South Carolina, that upset that they had. Like they just lean on the play clock. It is just like, look, we know we are going to average 6.5 yards per play, and if we average 6.5 yards per play, we will march down the field. But we are going to take every second of that play clock that we can, and we are going to make it so that this game goes from a 10 possession game, 15 possession game into like a 6 or a 7 possession game for you all. And I think that is something that can be done without having a power running game. It can be something that's done with a really effective short intermediate passing game that is able to operate because you can take shots down the field. I do think that this is like, I know Christian, we talked about this when Nixon first came on board. Like this is the interesting part about bringing an NFL guy in, because that's what NFL teams have to do to operate. Like that is the baseline of their operations, and then they're iterating on top of that fundamental level. At college, you can operate at that base level and get by 70% of the time. And so I think it's interesting to see, now that Nixon's been here for a year, even in this, what I thought, and I'm interested to see if you kind of agree with me here, I thought it was a very simplified playbook. Like there was nothing really new in the looks here. But the sequencing and the way that he attacked Colgate definitely showed that like we're trying to get some work in here for the intermediate and the deep passing game for a very specific reason.
I will say, like, playbook-wise and sequencing-wise, I don't have the biggest grasp on. I leave that to you and Steve. That's why you guys are here. What I will say is that one of the things that I do see a lot of this year, and this is one of the new wrinkles that Nixon has brought in this year, is that on some of those short and intermediate, passes that go to move the chains, Nixon likes to put tempo in and switch the tempo really quickly. And so that idea of bleeding the play clock might not be the best case for Syracuse, because it feels like they do a really good job of, when they get a first down on a decent pass play that goes for between 10 and 15 yards, they like to push tempo and press the advantage. And it feels like that is when you feel the Syracuse offense click at an incredibly high rate. So I think if you get to that point where you need offense, it wouldn't be the worst idea to push the tempo and go no huddle, especially if you get chains moving.
No, that's a good counterpoint, and I do think that we saw in this game Angeli looked far more comfortable with tempo than he did with a more traditional kind of offensive setup where you're going back to the huddle every play. And I do think that is something, if you're Angeli and Syracuse, like we have to work on that. We have to fix that, because tempo is great, but it also does mean that your defense is on the field a lot more. And look, we gave up 24 points to Colgate in this game. Like some of that was in the second half, but there was some points early on where like they were moving the ball on this defense. Like I don't know if our defense is at a point yet where we can play tempo in the way that we want to. That being said, it does appear, and again, this is probably something we'll have to dig into and hope that some other members of the Syracuse media dig into as well. It did seem like Angeli was making better decisions while in tempo. I don't know if it was a situation where the decisions were a lot more easily apparent, but there was a lot more confidence and quick hits, and even when the first read wasn't there, hitting the second read in stride, that was happening when he was in tempo, versus that more traditional, like what I was talking about, like drain the play clock kind of setup. So to me, I think that's interesting, because Notre Dame is not a team that plays tempo. It's not like he's been in a tempo system for 3 years and is now suddenly being asked to do something else. So it definitely is like an interesting wrinkle to the Angeli onion that we are unpeeling here. One of the other things about the Colgate game that I kind of wanted to pick your brain on a little bit was, I think I was guilty of this. I know other people were guilty of this. Against Colgate, asking for Ricky Collins. I saw Ricky Collins in this game. I understand why this is Angeli's team. I know you were early on the like, look, I think Angeli fits this offense system better. I think that there's also a level of execution here where I did not realize that Collins was as unpolished with a lot of the throws that we asked our quarterbacks to make as he was.
And definitely you see the reason why people say he was a better running quarterback. It's clear. He was definitely the better running quarterback. Holy crap, his mobility is fantastic. But like you said, Andy, it's just, some of the decisions and the execution in the passing game were not to the level of Angeli's. And that still could be to a number of factors. You got to consider that the last 2 weeks of practice Angeli spends with the ones, and maybe Ricky takes his foot off a little bit in terms of preparation and whatnot. It's different coming into a game and whatnot as a backup rather than as a starter. So there's a lot of factors that could be into play as to why Ricky probably didn't perform as well as I think Syracuse fans maybe would have liked to see from a backup quarterback. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but that doesn't ignore the fact that he didn't look that great. And you would have liked him to look a little better considering that he was the starter coming out of spring training camp. What I will say also, just to backtrack a little onto drives and whatnot and that type of construction. Apart from one drive, most of Syracuse's drives and offensive drives against Colgate, averaged about 5 or 6 plays. So it's not like they're also bleeding a ton of time off the clock. Also, I mean, those are relatively short drives. And against Colgate, most of them scored, and that's where you saw a lot of the explosive play nature as well come in from Angeli and Gill and whatnot. You even saw Nixon, pop off a couple of runs. And I think the thing is with Nixon is I think the way that we're seeing right now, it's really boom or bust with him. It's either 10 yards or 1. And that's unfortunately what you're seeing in the running game, which is why you would like him. But again, you see now why I think it would have been interesting to see if you have given Ricky more time in training camp, if you didn't bring Angeli, if he develops into at least a serviceable passer, because then it actually, like I said, it's definitely not in terms of like the playing like ability, but it definitely feels Dungy. It definitely feels Dungy DeVito, 2018. That's what it felt like, and now, or hell, even DeVito Schrader, if you want to go, look at it the same way. I've always liked the pocket passer, like Andy alluded to, and if Ricky got the starting job, it would have been interesting to see if he developed more of a starting passer. But he definitely felt like a Schrader, I'm going to escape first guy if things get out of trouble, instead of a McCord DeVito type of guy, and instead of scrambling scrambling to run the game, I'm going to scramble outside and look to pass first before I throw down. That's what Angeli is, and I feel like that plays better in Syracuse's offense just in general, even before Jeff Nixon.
Yeah, exactly, and I think it's just a situation where, kind of looking at look at Georgia Tech, the team that just beat Clemson this past weekend. Haynes King is definitively a running quarterback, who has also developed a really, really nice thing to the passing game. But I think that we've seen over the last couple of years, like he was really raw when it came to that passing attack. And so Georgia pivoted with a run first mentality, or Georgia Tech rather, has a run first mentality on offense. They're not trying to move the ball down the field with their arms. They're trying to move the ball down the field with their legs. Vanderbilt, the team that I was mentioning earlier, like Diego Pavia, is like very much that same like Garrett Schrader, Eric Dungy type thing, where now that he's a 5th-year, 6th-year senior, like the arm is there and he can make the throws, but he's really running like a modern triple option attack. And so, we saw what happened with Syracuse when they didn't necessarily have the weapons or the running back, or rather the wide receivers or the quarterback. And we turned into the Sean Tucker show with Garrett Schrader, and Sean Tucker was really the one carrying a lot of that there. But we didn't go full triple option kind of style there. I do think, though, that even with Dungy, that was far more of your classic, spread, air, not quite air raid, but more of a spread offense. And now with Nixon, you're running more of a pro style spread situation here where the ask is not for the quarterback to be able to get yards with the legs. The quarterback just needs to shift the pocket with the legs. Like, we're trying to keep defenses and defensive fronts off balance with when they send the blitz, where the blitz goes, the quarterback isn't there anymore. The quarterback is able to move, work through a zone because he's getting different angles at the zone. We don't necessarily need someone who can run. When you have someone like Collins, it opens up this interesting wrinkle where it's like, oh yeah, now we can add in quarterback runs, and that makes the defense think a little bit further, but you still need to be able to execute on those throws. And I think we saw in this Colgate game, his ability to execute those throws is just not at a level of consistency where we would be able to feel good about this season, where Angeli, even though he is far less mobile, does have that arm and does have that ability. I think one of the challenges that we will have from here on out, though, is for sure is that teams now know, like, look, this is a one quarterback system. This is not a two quarterback system. And two, Angeli is still not the best at calling out pre-snap protections. We're still seeing a little bit too often blitzers coming through. Again, I know Steve isn't here, and so I think we're kind of settling in on the idea that the offensive line isn't elite, but when the offensive line isn't elite, you need to be able to call out the protections. And I think what we saw last year was that Kyle McCord was really good at that because he had been at Ohio State. He had been in a big program where he was the starter for a year and took those lumps at Ohio State. And Jelly is taking those lumps this year in his first full season as a starter, which is why he has another year of eligibility left. Like, I think it's fairly safe to say that Angeli will be back playing college football next year. It's just a matter of, hopefully it's at Syracuse. But I think that it's clear that he's not going to go to the draft even with massive production this year, just because of those little fundamental things that he can clearly still get better at and are very teachable. These are not things that we've seen quarterbacks never necessarily learn how to do. And I think Clemson, we saw against Tennessee, there was some good adjustments. I'm hoping that those adjustments happen a little bit earlier against Clemson now that we've got the Tennessee game out of the way and we've got this Colgate game where he's gotten the confidence. He knows that he can attack and be aggressive and be on the front foot, and a defense will react to him, and he can still play well through those adjustments.
Big thing offensive line is that they just keep on dropping. You're probably going to go into that Clemson game without both your week one starting tackles. Obviously, we don't know the extent of Demetrius Weatherspoon's injury, but I find it very, very hard to believe that Travion Mack is going to be ready. So you could potentially be down two of your starting tackles from week one, which is not great, especially for an offensive line that we've already had questions about and still have questions about this deep into the season. We're already a quarter of the way through, and we still have questions about this offensive line. And you could see it even in the Colgate game, is that, pretty deep into that game, the offensive line is still out there with pretty much the majority of the starters, because Fran and Jeff Nixon and Dale Williams are mixing and matching the starters and trying to figure out which combination do they like. And so that might also, be a detriment to Angeli, who is trying to get on the same page. We heard how important in the past, especially with Schrader, when he had the rotating line of offensive linemen injuries under him, how important communication was between him and offensive linemen, and how difficult that got to be when he didn't have a consistent offensive line from week to week. And so this is where you may need to cut Angeli some slack as well, because he might be working with a different set of guys who have different preferences of communication, and not only with him but with one another, which really can be a detriment. And you hope that there's a little bit of consistency hopefully coming soon. And unfortunately, a major injury like to Demetrius Weatherspoon, hopefully he's okay. Luckily, we'll know because it's an ACC versus an ACC game. We'll get an injury report, so we'll know if Demetrius Weatherspoon is out or not. And same with Yassine and Devin Grant. So, but if the Weatherspoon is out, this gets very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I do think that like one of the nice things about going up against Clemson is even though their front is elite, like it's the tackles, their edges are good. Obviously Clemson worthy, like 4 and 5 star guys, but the real stars of that defensive line are on the interior, and it's a situation where that part of the line so far has looked the best and has looked fairly healthy. But again, we don't really know what's going on. You have the long weekend here. You have the extra day of prep for the Clemson game. So like you're saying, this Monday injury report is actually one of the things that I'm looking forward to most about this week, just because one, first time we get this, love this, thank you ACC. 2, I am infinitely terrified of just the all questionables. And 3, the other part of this that I think is going to be interesting, there's going to be on the Clemson side the biggest question mark, kind of switching when we talk about Syracuse's defense here. Part of the reason that the Georgia Tech game went the way it did for Clemson is that Cade Klubnik has not been good this year. He did not look great against LSU. Obviously did not play great against Georgia Tech. Part of the reason he didn't play great against Georgia Tech was that their 2 top receivers did not play, and I believe there was a third receiver who was hurt and missed the game as well.
Wasn't there a running back also?
So, yes, they have one running back that they're essentially giving carries to, who was a converted who was previously a wide receiver.
Oh, Earl Phillips, welcome back.
They don't have a ton of, like, Clemson came into this season. If you pick up any preview mag, everybody was high on Clemson because Cade Klubnik was supposed to have the easy button this year. He was supposed to have the most talented group of wide receivers in the conference. He was supposed to have a talented running back room to support him and make life easy here. And what has transpired is that every single person except Cade Klubnik has gotten hurt. And you're seeing that the issue is that now that Clemson defense is really strong, but the offense is just going 3 and out on way too many drives. The offense is not like, if you sack Clemson on first down, you are basically getting the ball back via punt because they are just unable to get any sort of chunk plays. And I think that is obviously, like you're saying, like Monday's injury report is going to be really important because that's going to determine, okay, are we getting the Clemson Death Star that was promised to us in the offseason, or are we still getting this like half-built version of it that is clearly not where it needs to be? And where I think things get interesting for us is that the secondary has taken a ton of strides in every game. Like, I feel like that is an area that's getting better game by game. Obviously, there's still room for improvement, but if we are going up against a Clemson team that is without its top 3 or 4 weapons, the Syracuse secondary should be able to make Cade Klubnik make mistakes, which has been how teams have gotten on top of Clemson so far. Like, that's the recipe right here. Again, it's very injury dependent, but I do think it's a situation where Clemson and Syracuse both have massive question marks where the other team has its strengths. Because, like we're talking about, like Syracuse's offensive line not doing great, Clemson's defense is like great. On our end, if Clemson's wide receivers are playing their 3rd, 4th, 5th strings, and we are playing our starters, like we're suddenly smiling. I do think that is the nice benefit of this ACC injury report, if only for us, as we like try to create content and we try to talk about this game. We're going to have a better idea of what the narrative of this game will be based off of that, which is why I think it's absolutely insane. Have you seen what the opening line is for this game yet?
Yes.
17.5 feels financially irresponsible for sportsbooks with all of these question marks and previous performance.
Here's where your life will feel good. SP Plus has Clemson at 9, which feels a little more reasonable.
I thought the line was going to be 10.5. Like I think that is a very until we know more about the injury situation for both teams, I would say that Clemson wins this game by 2 scores. I think 3 scores is really leaning on preseason predictions and not looking enough at what has transpired so far with both of these teams.
I think also it's a large part. Yes, even though Syracuse hung in there with Tennessee, for 3 quarters, it's still the final score wasn't great, and you just saw this Tennessee team go blow for blow with Georgia. So, like, it feels like there's a little bit of bias there as well. To say, well, if Tennessee, is this good, it probably means they beat up on Syracuse pretty good as well. And maybe there's a little bit of transitive property, stuff going there. You consider that this Syracuse secondary probably also gets Devin Grant back. That's pretty good. Demetrius Samuel was the highest graded starter by PFF, and also ironically played the most snaps. We had 56 on defense, and of course 5 of them on offense, which was also very, very fun. It feels good. You saw some of the depth players also in the secondary stepping up. Brahim Long and Barry Buxton. We continue to not say Chris Peel's name for fantastic reasons, because it feels like, again, like Chris Peel is playing Clarence Lewis's role of, hey, we don't know who you are, and that is fantastic, because that means you're doing your job correctly. So it feels like out of all of that, it feels, that the secondary is doing pretty well. It'll again be, as you mentioned, maybe a little bit of not wide receivers, of linebackers dropping back into coverage, because we all know how much I hate zone coverage and how that continued to burn Syracuse against Colgate at times. But again, a lot of people have said this online, and it's going to be tough again against Clemson. If you couldn't really pass rush against UConn and Colgate, are you going to really have an effective pass rush against the rest of the ACC?
Yeah, and I think that this is a situation where it is. I can understand if you're a skeptic of Syracuse. That's the one area that we haven't seen tremendous levels of improvement, and it is, look, you don't necessarily need an elite pass rush to be good at football or even have a great defense, but it is sure a hell of a lot easier if you do. And I don't necessarily think that this team is built to take the hard way around that. And again, I think that there's been some flack thrown Elijah Robinson's way. I don't think this is a scheme issue. I think this is a talent issue, and what his role in the talent acquisition process on that side of the ball is. Again, not something I can speak to at this moment, but I think we have seen that there are a lot of young players, such as in the linebacking core, where, look, the future looks really bright, and they're getting the type of guys that they want in there. It's just that right now, like, they are 18 years old, and
some of them are 17.
As good as they will be when they... Exactly, and they will be better when they are 20. They will be better when they are 21, and it sucks that it's just kind of frustrating, because it's just so clear that on offense we have found the plug and play method, and we've found the plug and play talent. It's a lot harder to do that on defense, just because physicality and size is so much more of part of what makes it good, and that's obviously where Syracuse is going to lose out to these bigger teams. But I do have optimism based off of the youth performance there. But the lack of pass rush, I just think at this point is going to, not as a feature is the wrong word, but I think that this is a problem that needs to be solved, but the solution is not necessarily something you can do schematically. It's going to be something that needs to just require a higher level of execution. But I'm, again, like we're talking about right here, for this game against Clemson, obviously it will be a problem if Cade Klubnik is able to just sit back there and have 10 years to throw the ball. There were some plays against Colgate. There were some plays in that second half against UConn where there were pressures. We didn't necessarily get to the quarterback. I think that this is probably going to be one of the lowest sack totals that Syracuse has ever had in a season. But we're at least collapsing pockets and making quarterbacks feel uncomfortable at a semi-consistent rate, which is obviously the biggest hedge that has ever been hedged. But like that's the silver lining that I can pull from this right now.
It's so tough because what you see every single year, it feels like, is that, and you brought this up in a previous podcast, is that it feels like every single year for the past decade or so, Syracuse's best pass rusher has been a linebacker. It feels that's what it always feels like. But then last year you bring in Fitio Diggs, and all of a sudden he just shit wrecks all over the opposing offensive line whenever he feels like it. And of course you don't have Fitio Diggs this year. So, like, again, you're replacing Fitio Diggs with David Reese, who doesn't have the same body size as Diggs. You're replacing Marlon Wax and Justin Barron with Gary Bryant and Antoine Delorier, who aren't necessarily pass rushing linebackers. They are definitely gap stoppers and coverage guys, at least from what we've seen so far. So,
yeah,
it's not only an emphasis, a change of personnel, like body wise and type wise, but also stylistic wise as well, which is going to be something to get adjusted to.
Yeah, and I think the most valuable position in defense, again, not an NFL podcast, but you can see who's getting paid in the NFL, is that elite athletic freak edge rusher, whether it's Garrett or Watt or Micah Parsons. We had the light version of that in Fitio Diggs. Obviously, he was at Texas A&M, a place that typically gets the raw versions of those elite athletic pass rushers. And it's really hard to get those guys at a place like Syracuse. You usually have to develop them over time, and it's some combination of getting a tweener position player, either have the freak growth spurt or the tweener gets very good at executing in a game environment. And we've seen that happen before. Like, we've seen the list of Syracuse linebackers and edge rushers over the years is pretty long, but they've all been in that mold. They've all been 3-star guys who kind of peak at the third and fourth years of their career, at least in the modern college football era. And so we're just seeing it right now where, like, we couldn't land one in the transfer portal. We couldn't land. I think the recruiting classes speak for themselves in terms of how highly ranked they are in comparison to other years. But again, like, we're dealing with a lot of 3-stars with a lot of upward potential here, and it's just going to take time for that position to develop. And so if you don't have that freak edge rusher, you need to have a very specific type of defensive alignment across the board, and you need to have guys that are executing at like the 95th percentile in that alignment. And that's just not going to be what we are this year. The reason that I think that there's some level of optimism here is like what I was talking about earlier with the secondary. Like, I think the secondary can at least cover for some of that. It won't be able to cover forever, just because, like, football is now built in a way that you can be the best corner in the league and you can go up against the 10th best wide receiver in the league. The 10th best wide receiver has a structural advantage that means that they will probably win that battle more times than the best defender in the league. Like, that's just football right now, and you kind of have to admit that. So it does kind of suck that is the position that the Syracuse defense is in. But I think we saw the second half of that UConn game, the only play that was made was an insane catch by a very, very, very good wide receiver who almost went to Michigan in the transfer portal. In the Colgate game, they were not really able to do much in the air against our top secondary members. It was really on the running game where they were able to do it, which again goes back to this whole conversation in the front seven. So I think that there's a little bit of growth happening. My concern for this game, and I guess Vegas's concern for this game as well, is that the talent of Clemson, even with potential injuries, is just going to eat up that weakness and make Syracuse pay for not being able to send consistent free rushers in Cade Klubnik's face.
It's so tough when you have specific linebackers, especially doing what you want to do what you want in a 4-2-5 right now, or in the 3-3-5 that Tony Wright and Rocky Long ran. Because again, yes, you're asking those linebackers to do a lot, but when you send them free to pass rush, boy, it's scary. And maybe that's what you're building Jimmy Trimble to be, as a freak guy who can, hopefully if he builds on a couple of pounds, becomes that type of freak rusher. I think, I think Fran said that something along the lines of like Jamie can be a first round linebacker, which would be really, really fun to see if he develops into that. Don't forget, Bartle Wax was a running back who became a linebacker. Justin Barrett was a wide receiver who became a safety and linebacker. So this ain't new for Syracuse either. It's so tough right now because I don't think we've ever seen Syracuse really develop the pressure that it needs to defeat Clemson. I just remember go back to the Clemson upset in 2017. That was Clemson running their second and third string quarterbacks out to try and take on Syracuse and losing. Klubnik should have time in the pocket, and even if he is down to lower receivers, it feels like based on his ability alone, the time in the pocket should allow him to find the soft spots in the zone that we know Syracuse are prone to giving up, because they would rather play zone coverage and give up 10 yards than play the man-to-man and give up 20.
Yeah, and again, I think part of this is the it feels a little bit like the bend don't break kind of mentality of those late Babers eras, post Brian Ward, where it was a lot less aggression and a lot more, look, once the field gets a little bit shorter, we'll take some risks and we're really just here trying to capitalize on mistakes. But those teams also had NFL talent at all three levels to kind of bail you out and make plays and force mistakes. So it is I'm with you a little bit here, where I feel like we are already throwing in the towel when the other team starts in their own territory, which to me, I feel like we should be doing the opposite of that. But it is going to be interesting to see how, after the Tennessee game, do we actually change up this schematically at all? Because we saw against Tennessee that even when you are playing cautious, they can still take the top off of you, because they're gonna take those shots, and when you are coming out in a pretty consistent bend don't break zone, they can play around that. They can play around that because you're predictable, and you need to be unpredictable. So I would like to see some adjustments there, and I'm interested to see kind of what those look like schematically. Especially, like as you're mentioning, like Chris Peel has been so wonderfully consistent and has been everywhere for this team. Do we sacrifice some of that consistency for potentially using him as an explosive disruptor in some way, shape, or form? I don't know, but I think that there are ways that you can tweak this system to at least look, at some point in this season, we are going to need to beat a good team if we want to go to a bowl. The nice thing is that the crazy part about this schedule is that, yes, this Clemson game maybe looks a little bit more competitive than it did at the beginning of the season. The Georgia Tech game looks infinitely harder. The Duke game looks like an absolute grab bag right now, and maybe that's you don't know what Duke team you're gonna get. And maybe that's the trade-off for North Carolina looking a little bit more beatable. Pitt and BC don't look bad.
You could say the same for SMU. Like that team's a kind of a grab bag as well.
Yeah, and I think that this is like last year. What we saw Syracuse do was that they had such a high floor in their games. Like every game that we played, with the exception of the 3 losses, which were Pitt, BC, and why am I blanking on the third one? That I memory hold. But they were all Syracuse played exceptionally playing well and deserved to lose any of those games. Like I think all 3 of those games they were the Pitt game especially was probably the worst of the worst.
Oh,
but in their wins, they were just really high level consistency.
Stanford Alamayor game.
Oh, that was the game that I was at for a bachelor party, so that's why I don't remember that game.
And herein lies the problem.
Yeah. Literally completely memory hold that game, and that's why. But in all the wins, they were just so remarkably consistent, and so you had some of these grab bag teams just play inconsistently, and Syracuse is like, great, we'll take the win against NC State by a score, but like we were the better team in that game because we were more consistent. I don't know if this Syracuse team has that level of consistency, but we'll see. And I am going into this Clemson game. I think in these last 45 minutes we've kind of outlined, look, there's a way Syracuse can win here because Clemson is struggling on offense to do anything, which is, if you would have told me 2 years ago that a Garrett Riley offense with 5-star talent instead of TCU talent looks confused and predictable and boring, I would have asked you why he ended up at, insert underperforming Miami here or something like that. Not Clemson. Clemson's, but like the other part of this too is that, like, remember, Clemson's going with a new defensive coordinator as well. Like Tim Allen obviously came from Penn State, but his reputation in Happy Valley was mixed. Definitely positive, but there was some people wondering like why Penn State always gave up the big touchdown when on the biggest drives. But it's a whole new defensive system on that side of the ball that they have to learn this year as well. And the Clemson defense has been giving up, I think it's over 350 yards per game right now, which is not great. Especially when you are Clemson, like you're supposed to be better than this, and you have NFL talent in the trenches. So I'm looking here and I'm going like, this is a team that is in transition. It's under siege. Dabo looks real unhappy every time he gets in front of a mic. There is a path to win here that I did not think was there at the beginning of the season. But I think, as we've covered here, Syracuse has its own messes that it has to figure out. This is not last year's Syracuse team where we knew what you were going to get week in and week out, and it was just about, can you take it to that extra 5th percentile to beat a really good team like Miami? I don't know. I don't know if this Syracuse team has that floor, but I think, as we saw against Colgate, they certainly have that ceiling that can open up a can of whoop ass on a team if given the opportunity.
It will come down to a couple of things. It will come down to see. I think Yacine is key here. Yacine and Devin are key here. You need both of them back, and I think if you see Angeli show the consistency that he had against Colgate, you're in a very, very good spot. Yes, I know it's Colgate, but it felt like Angeli was making throws that he wasn't making against UConn in that third quarter when people were booing him out of the building and asking for Ricky. If you see the Angeli who makes more of those passes in Colgate, it feels like we might even be talking about that UConn game in that bad of a light, because they were just some inconsistent throws from Angeli in that third quarter of that UConn game. You get him to play like he did against Clemson, not against Clemson, against Colgate, and have him be consistent. It feels like you're in a pretty good spot offensively. It's all just then about how does the defense hold up. And hopefully Grant coming back helps, shore that up.
Yeah, and again, we will find out on Monday with this injury report, like what their statuses are. It sounded like Willis could have gone in this game. I think Grant is probably a little bit more iffy, but I do think that they made the right call in holding them out against Colgate. And I think that this is, to your point, Syracuse needs to have as healthy of a team as possible if they want to have the best chance to beat Clemson. Like that shouldn't be controversial, but like that's the reality here. Those two guys are crucial to this whole enterprise. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Again, I think the nice thing about playing Colgate like this is that we got to spend this last 50 minutes basically talking exclusively about what does this mean for Clemson, because there's not much to break down in there. One of the things that I did want to break down that I think might have gotten overlooked by some people, Darian Williams, true freshman, got to play in this game. He had a touchdown, one of, I believe, 7 Syracuse players who had a first touchdown or first interception in the game, according to the social media graphic that I saw. But I think it means a lot for Fran Brown to, 1, play him in this game as a true freshman, 2, for him to score, and 3, the coverage on social media of this has been the Syracuse-ness of it all and the connection that Fran is building of this Northeast program, and specifically being able to take somebody who Michigan State was looking at and being able to keep him at Syracuse. We know the New Jersey stuff, like Fran will say New Jersey, every chance he gets. But there are still some players in New York that Fran has been able to, Fran has made a concerted effort to recruit New York in a way that Dino Babers didn't. And I think that him playing, getting the touchdown meant a lot. And I think it means a lot to the local community in a way that we would be remiss, obviously, if Steve was here. I think Steve would have another perspective on that as well. But in the meantime, I will just say I think that was a really cool moment to have happen, and to see the program treating it as such a big deal, I think goes a long way in this whole revitalization of Syracuse, the football program that Fran is doing for the long-term health of Syracuse.
Well, as kind of now a quote-unquote CNY transplant now, again, haven't been up here for the past couple of years now at this point, which is wild for me to say. It does feel like there is a revitalized interest in Syracuse football, especially in the local communities. Yes, maybe attendance didn't look that great against Colgate, but you had a full student section. Every single seat in that student section was taken. It feels like in these games in the past, you would have struggled to crack 30,000 fans in the Dome. And you easily hit that. Now, how much of that is holdover of the 10-win season, that's yours to decide. But you can't deny that some of that effect is also seeing guys that grew up here play. And not just, talking about the Darian Williams and Dante Bachier, or however you say his name, because that's a tough name to say, or even the Matthew Hans or the Kadir Shepherds. You're also talking about the Justice Ross Simmons from Rochester as well, because there's plenty of Rochester guys who talk about going to the Carrier Dome when they were younger, and being like, yeah, I want to play in the Carrier Dome now, the JMA Dome. But showing that, even showing guys like Richard Perry having some, success being from the Buffalo area. I know those guys. Perry's not necessarily directly a Fran guy, but the point still stands. It's this program is really starting to do what I think Fran wanted to do with this latest recruiting and transfer class, and that's get behind the freshmen. Because it feels like, for a lot of people, yes, transfer portal is flashy and sexy, and you could easily win a national championship with the right portal pickup. But you don't get there without the backbone of your team being developed, especially through your system. And so, because of that, you're seeing Fran really kind of, I want to say, push the right freshmen. We heard a lot about it with, if you've listened to Fran's press conference, he pushes Byron Washington a lot. He's always pushed Demetrius Samuel a lot. He's pushing those young freshmen and encouraging them to make a play. He put in, God, was it 52 players in by the time you got to the fourth quarter. Not even by the time you got to the fourth quarter. He had 52 players in from Syracuse played by the time they just got to the second quarter, halfway through that second quarter. And so there's always been, Fran knows he's got a young team, he's got a youthful team. And so because of that, he's going to push the freshmen to make plays. He's going to push the freshmen that he trusts to develop and put them in big time situations. And so putting in guys like Demetrius Samuel into tough spots, putting guys like Antoine Delorier right onto the starting linebacker role, putting guys like Byron Washington, when he gets there, into a very, very prominent role, which we may see coming this week against Clemson. It's gonna be interesting to see where we go from here. Indeed. Looks like Andy just dropped out. Again, we can't get a full internet stream with Andy in, so we'll try to get him in. But again, as always, we're going to really start to wrap things up. We're going to try to get Andy back in 1 second, everyone. It's a test for Syracuse, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of Syracuse fans who want to make this a overreaction and it's naturally what you do. I mean, we saw Syracuse fans do it for the Clemson game. I mean, not the Clemson game, for the Tennessee game. That, hey, the Tennessee game was what the basis of the season was. We were going to build everything on the Tennessee game. I know we saw the UConn game. It's like, oh no, the season's crashing down. We're really not going to know what this team is. And again, this was the same thing last year. Where we really didn't know what this team was until after the bye week. Andy's back in with us, by the way, guys. What I was just saying, Andy, I'll recap quickly, is that Fran really loves to push the freshmen, so that's why you see Byron Washington getting a lot of love. That's why, I mean, you see Demetrius Samuel and Antoine Delorier get starts, and that's why you saw 52 players get in before the second quarter ended for Syracuse. But a lot of people are going to want to make a lot of assumptions based on this Clemson game, and we've got to caution against that, because what we saw for Syracuse last year is that we didn't know what this team was until halfway through the season. And so we have to get to that point first, which is after the SMU game and conveniently right where the bye is, before we start really making assumptions about what the Syracuse team is and isn't. Because we saw assumptions, I mean, even admittedly only from our end as well, swing quickly to one end for Tennessee, then the other end to UConn last week. So, yes, we should be talking about the things we want to see from this team as critiques that we want to see them improve as, not overall assumptions on how the rest of the season is going to go.
Yeah, and I think that this is, again, we talk about the schedule every week on this show because that's the reality of it. But look, over the next few weeks before we get into the bye week, we have the game at Clemson, home against Duke, at SMU. You already mentioned it. Like, SMU has turned into a grab bag game. Duke is a heck of a grab bag game. How Syracuse comes out of that bye week into the stretch that is Pitt, Tech, UNC is going to be really big, because that's where the schedule is going to be make and break, is that those three games. You probably have to win two of those games to have a shot at bowling. And again, that's going to depend on what you do in this stretch here against Duke and SMU. But I think that we are still at a bit of an unknown of this team, just in terms of its consistency, just in terms of what is that next gear, what is that next level that they can reach. And I am not going to get upset if they lose to Clemson. I'm going to get upset if everybody gets hurt and we lose to Clemson, because then that really throws a monkey wrench into doing something against Duke. But I think that that's a spot on point there.
One final thing before we do wrap things up, because we are getting to that time where we should wrap up the podcast. We do have to talk about something non-football wise, and sad. It is sad news, unfortunately. Former Syracuse women's basketball player Tiana Monkakaki unfortunately passed away, an All-American, All-ACC guard for the women's basketball team, who was so prolific in her time at Syracuse. Unfortunately, passed away after a long battle to cancer, which started here in Syracuse. And those of only just a few years ago at this point will remember the Tough for Tea campaign that Syracuse worked on, how she came back to this team as well and still played even after her first cancer battle. And unfortunately, she passed away earlier this week. And I've been seeing a lot of people like and share the tribute and the moment of silence that Syracuse football had at the beginning of the Colgate game. And it's so touching to see how much she meant to not only the program, but also to the Syracuse community.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about Tiana and her impact on Syracuse was that it was at a time when the women's basketball program was basically an afterthought, and she was a big reason why the basketball program became something that people had expectations for, became something that people really cared about. And I think that her talent on the court was just, you can watch the highlights and you can just, it's mesmerizing at times how good she was for how small she was. And I think off the court, it's obvious that she was a fighter. It was a situation where she, went to the WNBA and got cut, and then goes to Australia and becomes the MVP of the league. She goes, and she could have stayed in Australia for the rest of her life, but continues to try to play abroad, continues to just continue and fight. And so it sucks when you see somebody with that level of compete, finally end their battle at such a young age. And so it's definitely something that, I was on campus during some of her run. She was an absolutely phenomenal player, an absolutely phenomenal addition to the Syracuse family, and I'm really glad to see that everybody, even though she's been away from campus for so long at this point, I'm really glad to see everybody respond with the love and the care that somebody of her stature and her impact deserves. And I'm sure that once women's basketball starts, there will be either some season-long memorial, there will be something that will happen there, just again, because as you mentioned, like the All-ACC, the All-Americans, like she was one of the best women's college basketball players, period. And she did so at Syracuse at a time when nobody was thinking about Syracuse basketball. And I think that is really important for us to remember, and it's really important for her to be commemorated, because what Syracuse basketball does from here on out will be because she was at the program and she achieved at such a high level wearing orange.
So, unfortunate, sad note to end the pod, but we have to get in that for Tiana, again, for someone who really embodied what it meant to represent the program, not only on the court, but off the court as well.
Exactly. And so, like Christian was saying, it's tough to end the podcast on that note, but if you got to watch her play, remember that joy, and all the best wishes to her family, who it sounds like was with her at the end, which is, all we can all really hope for there. So thank you again to everybody who tuned into this show, the duo Christian and Andy show. We really appreciate the support. Make sure that you like and subscribe this show on your preferred podcast platform of choice. It helps us trick the AI overlords into expanding the Ottoman Empire. We want to thank our sister site, newsmagician.com. As always, you can read content by both of us over there. Make sure that you follow us on Twitch. Like, we live stream this every Sunday night ish at 8 p.m. ish. The easiest way to guarantee that you hear this show first, and we always appreciate the support over there. And finally, make sure that if you are, following us throughout the football season. We really appreciate it. You can follow us on our social media channels. There are many of them. Share the show as much as you can, guys. We really do appreciate Fans First Sports Network at being a part of this and being able to bring this show back to you every week. So we'll be back next Sunday to talk about Clemson. If Steve is ever to find his way out of Epcot, not sure he's ever going to want to leave there. But if he does make it back, he'll be here to talk about that game. We'll talk about the game. We'll talk about all the things that happen. And obviously, as always, go Orange.
Go Orange.